This coming year in Eretz Yisrael is a Shemitah year. It creates a whole series of challenges, as we're going to read about in this week's Parsha, Parshas BeHar, which discusses the laws of Shemitah. And as we know, a person who owns a field that produces crops has to not work the field during the Shemitah year, has to let the land remain fallow. There has to be a Shabbat Lashem, a Sabbath for Hashem, a Sabbath for the land. And there are a number of reasons that are given for this, which many of you are aware of already. It's a way of commemorating Shabbos on a macro level, on a national level, not just on an individual level with the observance of a weekly Shabbos. It also gives the land a chance to recover itself, to come back to itself, both physically and metaphysically. And so there's a tremendous amount to be gained by having a Shemitah every 7 years. But this creates tremendous challenges for an agricultural society. And therefore, the Torah, cognizant of this challenge, says in Perek Chaf-Hei, Pasuk Chaf, which you have on your sheets, V'chi tomeru, ma nochal b'shana hashabi'it. You'll say, what are we supposed to eat during the 7th year? Hein lo nizra v'lo ne'esof et tevuateinu. We can't plant and we can't harvest. So what are we going to live off of? So Hashem answers the question, and He says, don't worry. V'tzivisi esbir chasi lachem b'shana hashishis. I will give charge of my blessing. I will send forth my blessing in the 6th year. Ve'asas es hatevua lishlosh hashanim. And my blessing will create enough grain in the 6th year to last you 3 years. The 6th year, the 7th year, and the 8th year, while you're replanting and waiting for the crops of the 8th year to grow, you'll still even have leftovers from the 6th year. So don't worry, have bitachon in Hashem, and everything will be okay. It's a pretty bold claim for HaKadosh Baruch Hu to make, and for Bnei Yisrael to follow. One of the reasons why the prophet Yirmiyah tells us that we were exiled from our land is because we failed to observe the Shemitah laws. And therefore the land had to remain fallow for the number of Shemitah cycles that the Jewish people during BAYT Rishon failed to observe. And it was the 70 years of Babylonian exile that compensated for all of the Shemitah years that the Jews did not observe. And one can only assume that that's what happened during the 2,000 years of exile. And by the time we came back in 1948, we had the land had a chance to recover. And now we can go back and we can work the land and observe the Shemitah year as it's supposed to be observed. But let's take a look at the Zohar. The Zohar, in its cryptic form, as we all know, the Zohar is a very cryptic text and it needs to be analyzed very, very carefully, says as follows. This is in Parshas BeHar, the Zohar. Rabbi Yehuda Pasach. Rabbi Yehuda opens up with the following pasuk in Tehillim. He says, "Betach b'Hashem va'asei tov shechon eretz ure'ei emunah." That's what the pasuk in Tehillim says. Place your trust in God and do good. Dwell in the land and shepherd faith. In other words, through dwelling in the land, you will be able to accumulate faith in Hashem. So now let's take a look and see how the Zohar analyzes this pasuk. La'olam barnash yehi zahir b'moreh. A person should always be careful with his master, referring to Hashem. V'yidbak libe b'mehemnusei ila'a. A person should always cleave his heart to a higher level of faith. B'gein di'avi shlim b'moreh. So that he can be at peace with his master. Now, we're going to explain all of this text, so please, if it sounds very bizarre and cryptic, just bear with me. That if a person is complete with his master, then no one in the world can do anything bad to him. We skip several lines in the Zohar and we get to the next part. And it's for that reason that if a person properly, truly has faith, then Hashem will take care of him. The pasuk says, "V'chi someru manu chal b'shana hashavi'is," that you will ask, what shall we eat in the 7th year? So Maksiv, what is Hashem's answer? V'tzivisi esbir chasi lachem b'shana hashishis As the pasuk said, I will give forth my blessing in the 6th year, and you will have grain for all 3 years, years 6, 7, and 8. So comments the Zohar, and it says ve'asas. What kind of word is ve'asat? Really, it's ve'aseta mi bayalei. Go back to that pasuk chaf aleph on the top. I have it underlined to accentuate the Zohar's question. If the subject of the pasuk is the bracha of Hashem, a bracha is aseta. It should be ve'aseta et ha'tevuah lishlosh. Grammatically, there's a letter hey missing from that word. That word ve'asat is extremely unusual. You will not find that conjugation anywhere else in the Torah. So Ella, so rather says the Zohar, la'afka hey di'it le'shamta v'naicha v'lo avid avidita. The answer is that Hashem deliberately left off the hey, because the hey of Hashem's name, of Yud-Kei Vav-Kei, represents a God who rests and leaves things fallow. Kesiv re'u ki Hashem nosein lachem bayom hashishi lechem yomayim. So, and as an example of that, we have the name Yud-Kei Vav-Kei, including the letter hey, gives you the Sabbath and gives you a double portion on the day before the Sabbath. And kegavna da b'tzivisi asbir chasi lachem b'shana hashishis begomer. And it is because of that, says Hashem, I will give forth my blessing on the 6th year. So now I'm going to tell you what these cryptic words mean, at least what I think that they mean. Because these words of the Zohar could be interpreted in any number of ways. But what does it mean that the letter Hey of Hashem's name represents Hashem being at rest? What is going on here? What is being conveyed by the Zohar? So I wouldn't have known the answer if I had not seen the Netziv. The Netziv does not address the Zohar. But I think that if we look at his commentary, we may discover that he may have known about the Zohar. And this was exactly what he was addressing when he wrote his commentary. If you take a look at the Netziv's commentary, Rav Naftali Tzvi Yehuda Berlin of the Volozhiner Yeshiva, you take a look at his commentary on Pasuk Chaf in the Sefer Ha'amek Davar, you see where it's underlined, V'chi Tomeru, maybe you'll say, what are we going to eat in the 7th year? Ba'asher shebe'emes kol ze eno ela ma'asei nes. So the Netziv says as follows, he says, let's think about this. How is it possible for an entire nation to sustain itself agriculturally if 1/7 of its agricultural efforts are put completely to rest? For an entire year, there's no planting. He says the only way that can happen is through an overt miracle. Sheyiyu gedelim b'shana lo zeruah tivuah u'peirot ha'ilan masbiyim es kol ha'adam v'ha'behema. It's unheard of that you let your entire society let their land remain fallow, and yet it produces enough grain and crops to feed every single adult human being and animal. V'yadua de derech nes eno roi elo lefi ha'hachana lekach. And this is very important. He says, as we all know, that a person's receptibility to miracles is predicated on that person's preparation for the miracle. You're only worthy of a miracle if you've worked on yourself to receive the miracle properly. Not everyone is privy to a miracle. The holier you are, the more receptive you'll be to receive a miracle. And it's on a continuum. It's on a sliding scale. A person who's not holy at all will not be worthy of any kind of miracle. The holier you get, you'll get more and more overt miracleness in your life, right? To the point where if you're ultimately holy, then the skies will open for you and the sea will split for you, right? But you can be somewhere along the scale such that if you're only moderately holy, then miracles will happen, but they won't be of such an overt nature. You see, so it's all commensurate to your spiritual madrega that determines the level of overtness of spectacle that the miracle will manifest itself as. He says, "V'hainu al pi shehiktim hakasu va'asisem es chukosai," And that's based on the pasuk that says that if you perform my statutes, sheyirbu bishkidas hatoro vilpilpula b'shanim elu, that if you increase your Torah study and your dedication to mitzvos during those years, ve'ein min hapela sheyugdal kocham le'eloka, and if you intensify your efforts towards God, v'yu ma'aminin u'mosrim es atzmam lahanhaga elyonazu, and you truly become people of faith, and you completely submit yourselves to the tutelage of Hashem, and you realize that it's only Hashem that will provide, then you'll merit this really miraculous kind of divine providence, that God will open up the skies miraculously and cause the manna to fall from heaven. Aval imlo tihiyu bazeh ha'ofan, v'tihiyu mishtomimim al zeh, ma na'aseh b'shana hashvis v'hashminis. But if you're not on that high madrega, right? You're not such a holy person. You're not such of great faith. And you will open up your mouth and say, Ribono Shel Olam, what am I supposed to eat during the 7th year and the 8th year? So then, the kasher yekain az lo yeh derech nes. So if that's the case, then God says, I can't do overt miracles for you because you're not on such a high madrega anymore, because you're questioning. And you don't have the simple emunah that a holy person is supposed to have. So shehashgacha hi ba'a lefi hachana, that a person's providence is commensurate to their self-preparation. U'chemoshe kosav b'sefer Shmos Gimel Yudalev Yotes Vav b'sefer Dvarim, etc., etc. V'haya ole al adas the ikar mitzvah shvius v'yovel lo nitna elo le'esnahagim b'derech ma'ala yisera. And therefore, one could mistakenly think that only holy people will be sustained during Shemitah year, because only they will be privy to the miracles of Shemitah and Yovel. But if I'm an average guy and I don't really have that level of emunah, maybe I won't be so secure in having what to eat during Shemitah year. Aval, and then he says, Aval be'emes ein okay. But that's actually not true. Why? Because the Torah can fulfill its promises even to people who are just average Joes like you and me. And that's why the Torah addresses those people, the average guys. The average people who don't have that holy emunah of just having total faith that Hashem will provide. Those people, they're clearly going to be taken care of. But you guys, the average people in the crowd, you're going to be of average emunah. You're not going to be so holy. And you're going to ask the question, Nutaka, what are we going to eat during the Shemitah year? How are we going to make this work? Right? The holy people don't even ask the question. But the average people, all right, fine, so you'll ask the question, what are we going to eat? So, Azai Vitzivisi. That's when Hashem says, I will give forth my blessing. Don't worry, Shuhu b'derech hashgacha pratit b'derech hateva. And you can continue reading the commentary on your own, but that's really what I wanted to point out. That what the Tziv is pointing out is that Hashem is promising not just the Heilige Yidden, not just the holiest of the holy that you'll have, Hashem will do a miracle for you. But He's promising the people of modest faith, who don't have that holy perspective on life, that I'll take care of you also. It may not be as miraculous of a manifestation of my providence as the grace at Tzaddikim are going to have. The grace at Tzaddikim, they'll be able to sit at home, and all of a sudden there'll be a delivery of grain at their doorstep. Other people will have to work a little bit harder to get their mun during the Shemitah year. But I promise you'll have it nonetheless. It won't be as miraculous in its manifestation to you, but you'll get it al pi derech hateva. You'll get it through natural causes. And it seems like that's the kind of Eretz Yisrael that we have in our generation, which is, for most people, Eretz Yisrael is nikneit b'yisurim. You acquire it through tremendous hardship. As Yom HaZikaron today sadly reminds us, that it does come through blood and sweat and tears. But Hashem says, it'll come. It may not be as miraculous as you would like it to be, because perhaps we're not at a level where we deserve those miracles. But it'll come nonetheless, even for the people who ask the questions. It's okay to ask the questions, but it'll come. And so I think that that's what the Zohar is making reference to. I think that what the Zohar is trying to say is that for those people who ask the question, Hashem says, I have to leave off the letter Hey from my response to you. Ve'asas es ha'tevua. It's not going to be ve'asasa es ha'tevua. Ve'asasa es ha'tevua is referring to a miraculous tetragrammaton Shem Havaya God who's going to come forth in all of his grandeur and miraculousness and bring you miraculous food from heaven during the Shemitah year. It won't be that way, but it'll still be the asas. There'll still be a creation of wealth for you during the Shemitah year. It'll be al pi derech hateva. You'll have to work for it. You won't work the field. The fields will grow. It may not be as plentiful as if you had worked it, but I promise you, you'll have enough to last you for all 3 years. There will still be hardship. There will still be challenges, but I promise you, you'll have enough. But if you don't ask the question at all, what will we eat for the Shemitah year? Then says Hashem, then it'll be ve'asita. Then you'll have miracles. Mitahei, with the letter Hey. You'll have miracles, and you'll be able to see the hand of Hashem in everyday living. And you'll see the miracles of being provided for. So it's a very important lesson for us that the level of hashgacha pratis that we have in our lives is commensurate to the amount of faith that we're prepared to invest in the Ribono Shel Olam. It doesn't always work that way, but many times it does. Chazal tell us that when the Jewish people received the man, every person received the man differently. You may know this medrash. There are certain people who had to go out far outside of their homes to go and gather the man. And there were other people who would just go outside their tent, and it was delivered. It was home delivery man. See, there was the man that you had to go to the post office at the end of the block to get, and then there was home delivery, just like it is in Vaughan, right? Some people have home delivery of their mail, and other people have to go out to the end of the block to get it. Right? So depending on your madrega, if you were on a higher madrega, you got home delivery. And if you're on a lower madrega, then you had to go travel further in order to pick up the man. It also says in the Medrash that there's another contradiction, and that, by the way, the Medrash bases it on the fact that there's a contradiction, because one pasuk says v'yatzaham, that people had to go out and gather the man, and another pasuk says that it appeared on your doorstep. So how do you reconcile it? Two different kinds of people. There's another Medrash that reconciles another difficulty. One pasuk says that you had to grind it and cook it in order for it to be a palatable. And another pasuk says that it was like honey cakes that you could just eat ready-made. So Chazal again reconcile the contradiction, and they say it depended on your spiritual madrega. If you are very, very high madrega, that home delivery honey cakes were ready to eat. And if you weren't on a high madrega, you had to go out and pick up the man, and then you had to do some kind of preparation in order to make it edible. It all depended on your madrega. And now imagine living in a society like that. Now imagine, just think to yourself, every day you're in your tent with another few 100,000 people in Klal Yisrael. You have a few thousand people living next door to you that are members of your tribe. And you say, "Hi, Bob, those raptors are doing great, aren't they?" We're sitting out in the desert, and we're having nice, just making conversation out in the tent in the midbar. "Oh yeah, just came out to pick up my man, and there it is at my doorstep." Next day you go out. "Hi, Bob, how was your day yesterday?" You look down, there's no man. There's no man. Why? Because you spoke Lashon Hara about your other friend Tabab yesterday, or something to that effect, and you discovered that my man is not at my doorstep anymore, and now I got to go out and figure out where I'm going to find it. I got to go out into the field. So that in itself, there was the way that Medrash depicts that there was a real manifestation of a person's spiritual madrega back in those times, in that the door Dea, we're known as the generation of great knowledge, of great understanding, because their spiritual level was worn on their sleeve. But today we don't have that. But there are certain remnants of that kind of manifestation of one's spiritual madrega, which according to the Zohar seems to be manifest every Shemitah year. There are those Jews who will go through the Shemitah year in Eretz Yisrael without a problem and a care in the world, because they have perfect emunah, perfect faith, Now, whether or not that it's a question of perception or of subjective perception or ontological reality, I leave it up to other people to think about. The person who says, like Reb Zusha, that I have no problems in the world, and I'm the wealthiest man in the world, that may be a part of that issue as well. If a person has perfect faith that Hashem will provide, then that becomes their reality, no matter how much they're able to put on the table. But those who ask the question, Oy, Gewalt, what are we going to eat? What are we going to eat? How are we going to make a living? And what's going to happen? So for those people, Taka, there will be a greater challenge. And we have to hope that we can rise to the occasion to be able to be part of that experience in Eretz Yisrael. We have to rise to the occasion that we can raise our level of emunah to be able to see Hashem's providence in our lives and eventually see that providence not only in Chutz La'aretz but in Eretz Yisrael as well. Any questions? Yes.
I am always contradicted because a lot of people in Israel, they sell the land to an Arab for the year, and you're not leaving the land fallow. So how is that okay?
Well, it was a psak that had come from Rav Kook and many other poskim in the early part of the 20th century when it was really deemed to be impossible to even live, to survive by observing the Shemitah law. And so just like we sell our chametz before Pesach, a very similar mechanism was devised for selling Eretz Yisrael. The only requirement of having the land remain fallow is when it's in Jewish hands. Just like there's only requirement of not owning chametz when it's owned by a Jew. But a Gentile is allowed to own chametz on Pesach, and a Gentile is allowed to own and work the land during Shemitah year. So it was on that basis that many Rabbanim in the early part of the 20th century, before there was a strength and a critical mass of Jews living in Eretz Yisrael, that they provided this heter. Some people still rely on the heter mechira. It's called the heter mechira. But a number of many mainstream voices in the rabbinic community have stated very openly that, including the Rabbanut of Israel today, have stated that that was an appropriate heter to rely upon when the situation was dire for the chalutzim. But it no longer is the case. We can import produce and still let our lands remain fallow. There are ways to manage a proper observance of Shemitah without having to sell the land to Arabs during that time. Yes.
So, are you saying that this mitzvah of Shemitah is an exception to the general rule of Ein Somchen al Hanes?
It is an exception to that general rule. Is that Hashem has told the Jewish people that you should be Somech al Hanes. You should, but if you don't find that you're able to, because you can't muster that level of emunah, Hashem says, don't worry. Al pi derech hateva, even without seeing a nes, you'll see how things will work. Hashem is actually responding to that in Somchen al Hanes. He's saying, if you feel that you can't be Somech al Hanes, I understand. And therefore I'll provide for you in some way. That'll be al pi derech hateva. Okay, have a wonderful day, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming.